video, and I'm going to show you today a quick way to make 3 different blocks out of 2 charm squares. So we've got 2 charm squares that are very contrasting in color, and we're going to create 3 different blocks out of these. Charm squares are 5-inch squares, usually pre-cut squares, and you can purchase them in charm packs. Here are a couple that I've picked up. This one's called Basically Batik, and it's by Benartex, and it has 40 different Benartex batik fabrics in it. I also have this one that I really like. It is white on white and black on black prints. One of the things that's really nice about a charm square is you can usually, a charm pack, is you can pick them up usually for about the cost of a yard of fabric, and you get 40 5-inch squares with that. So it's a great way to create a really scrappy look or to just get a chance to sample a lot of fabrics in a line that you like. So let's take a look at the 3 blocks we can make. The first block we're going to make is just a simple half square. So we're going to be doing half square triangles, and we're actually going to get 2 of these blocks out of 2 charm squares. We're going to start by taking these blocks and placing them right sides together. So both of these 5-inch squares right sides together. Now if you're using charm squares, they're 5-inch square, but with the pinked edge, they really in practicality end up being more like 4 7/8. So if you're going to cut your own, you want to get the same size, you want to cut those squares 4 7/8 inches. Now what we're going to do to get that half square is we're actually going to draw a line from one diagonal corner to the other, and that's going to be our cut line. I like to use this 4-inch by 14-inch ruler, and it has a 45-degree angle on it. And what we're going to do is use that 45-degree angle, putting that along one edge of the square, and then we are going to mark that diagonal line. Now don't worry about this, I'm actually using a permanent marker, Sharpie, but this is going to be in the seam allowance, so it will not show. Just make sure you use something that's permanent and won't bleed when it's washed. So now you've got your line drawn from one corner to another. Now you're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew 1/4 inch away from the line on either side. So you're going to sew 2 lines, one on either side of this line that you've marked, 1/4 inch away. So I've got one like that I've already done where I've sewn the 1/4 inch, and now what we'll do is actually cut this right along that marked line. So again, we use that 45-degree angle along one side of the square, and then the straight edge of the ruler, we will make sure we line up the 1/4 inch with our seam, and the center of the 2 seams is going to be the edge of the ruler. And now we're going to just cut right between those. And what you're going to see is the end result is 2 half square triangle squares. Now the next block that we're going to make is a 1/4 square block, or an hourglass shape. Now if you want to get this hourglass look, then you're going to use, again, just 2 charm squares, and you're actually going to start out with the same process as you did with the first one, where we're going to stitch those 2 squares together on either side of that diagonal line. So here are the 2 pieces that are the result of that. Now to get the 1/4 square, what we're going to do is actually lay these 2 pieces down again, and I'm going to put them together as if I were going to sew them together, matching the dark to the light and the light to the dark. So I'm actually lining up the edges of that fabric and these seam lines so that they're exactly lined up. Now what I want to do is I'm actually going to cut a diagonal perpendicular to the seam line. So there's the seam line. We're going to cut a diagonal perpendicular from this corner to this corner through both layers. Again, we use that handy 45-degree along the edge of the square, and then we cut from diagonal to diagonal. Now what this is going to give us is actually 4 pieces, And what we'll do is swap these. So that we end up with opposite colors. So now you'll take these two pieces together and you're going to sew them together along that cut edge that you just cut, making sure that you line up the seam carefully and then you line up the corners of your triangles. Now this is going to be a bias edge when you sew this together with a 1/4 inch seam, so you just want to be sure you don't go too fast and you don't stretch the fabric while you're sewing it together. So then when you sew this together, your end result is going to be your hourglass or your 1/4 square. And you'll actually get 2 of those out of 2 charm squares. Now the final block that we're going to do out of 2 charm squares is the pinwheel. And the pinwheel's also done in a similar manner. The first step we're going to do is to mark those diagonals, but this time, instead of marking just the one diagonal, we're actually going to mark both directions. So we're going to turn it the other direction, and we will actually end up with an X across the middle of our square. Now once you've marked your X, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from each line on both diagonal lines. So actually we'll sew an X. There'll be 4 seams all together. So I've done this one. I've sewn my 4 seams, both directions. And now we're going to cut this actually into 8 pieces. And when we cut this apart, we're going to cut it on the vertical and the horizontal in half first. And then we'll cut each of those pieces in half along the marked lines. So first we cut the vertical and horizontal. And when you cut this, you'll have the edges of your square to line up, and you will also have the intersection of your seams. Where those seams intersect, that's right where you're going to cut. Okay, so you end up with 2 rectangles. And if you want to save a little time, you can stack them together to cut the other direction. Or if you want to cut them separately, you can. And now cut again, and we'll end up with 4 square units. And each of these square units has 2 seams in it and a line marked down the middle. Now again, I'm going to actually stack these and cut them all at once, but if you prefer, you can cut them one at a time. So I'm cutting right down that marked diagonal line in between those seams. And what you're going to end up with is 8 small half square triangle squares. And you'll have 8 of these. I've got 4 of them here that I've already pressed. And what we can see is with these, we can actually turn the dark and light pieces in such a way that we end up with a pinwheel. And we'll sew 2 blocks together and 2 blocks together. So we end up with 2 rectangle units like this. And now we're going to sew these 2 rectangle units together to make our pinwheel. When you put these together, this will be the only tricky part as far as lining up your seams. You want to make sure that where your triangle points meet in the center of that pinwheel, that you're stitching exactly at that point. And when you get everything done and stitch it all together, you're going to end up with a little pinwheel like this. And you'll get 2 of these identical blocks out of 2 charm squares. I really like using these 2 charm squares like this to create these blocks. I think all 3 of these blocks are really versatile. And I would just show you a couple layouts here that you can do with the 1/4 square. If you want a really scrappy look, you can simply use your 1/4 squares and just be sure that you line your light to darks so that you get the contrast. And you could do your entire quilt this way, Or you could make this one block and then sash it and set it within another. Now you can actually change the look simply by alternating some solid squares. So if I put some solid squares in here, you can see that we change the look of our square. Let's do red. And then if you want to vary it even more, you can use a square that's a print. Now if you start out with two 5-inch charm squares or two 4 7/8 inch cut squares, if you do the half square block, you're going to end up with a 4.5 inch finished block. If you do the quarter square block, you're going to end up with a 4-inch finished block. And if you do the pinwheel, you will end up with a 3.5 inch finished block. And I'll also have these dimensions listed on our website, which is scissortailstudio.com. If you have any questions, feel free to visit us there, or you can leave a question in the comments and I'll be happy to address it. Thanks for joining us.